Hello and welcome back to Concept First to Mastery. So in this particular section, we want to continue with our CSS Beginner series. This time around, we want to look at Flexbox in CSS. And as you can see, right, there's a screenshot of what we'll be building after learning the basics of how to work with Flexbox, right? So this this screenshot here, right, with the navigation bar, right, these boxes and this game section. So we are going to be using whatever we've learned in CSS Flexbox, right, to actually implement this. This might look small, but it allows you to learn something, right, and at the same time, not just learn the basics, but at the same time, learn how to apply it quickly. So if you're able to do this, you can be sure that anytime it comes to the use of Flexbox, right, you are very, very convenient and good to go. And Flexbox is very, very important to building layouts when it comes to application, right? So most times Flexbox is what people use these days, and it just makes your life easy. So you need to understand how to use it. So without wasting time, let's get into this. All right, so just like I was trying to explain, so this is the screen. Like you will see now, I'm loading it on localhost with port 5,500, right? You see that we have this navigation section, so you learn to build navigation using Flexbox. Now you also see this section, right, where we have the analytics of the game that's been played. So you also learn to design this using Flexbox. You can see that it's very clean, right? Now you also have the game section, right? So I won't be taking you through how to play the game, but the JavaScript behind the game. We've not done JavaScript, right? But at the same time, I will still be able to show you how to design this and work with this. All right, let's get into this. So what I will do is just the way we've normally worked. I would like to so let's do it this way. Just so that you can tag along, right? I have this folder that I've created before now called CSS series, right? And inside that folder, if I open it, you see that we have things that we've done before. Blog 1, blog 2, CMS dashboard. That was the last one we did. So I want to continue with that flow. And what I did, what you will do if you are following me is just to open your CS. So let's say you are not here yet. Okay, let me just close this. I want to believe by now you should even know how to do this already, but just for the sake of probably those who are just joining, let's do this. So cd into that directory, which is this. I'll just drag this in the folder, hold it, right click and hold it, right? And bring it in or left click, bring it in into here and then tap enter. So you can see now that I'm in this folder, right? And if I do want to check things in that folder, I can say dir, right? It will show me what is in that folder. And you can see that these are the items in that folder. So, but that's not where we are going to. Now, this folder, I want to actually create the current project in it, right? What we want to do now. I'll just say, I think I'll be naming it game, right? I'll just say Flexbox game. So let me just create it directly from here. MKDIR. So you can choose to do it directly from here also, but whichever one is convenient. MKDIR. So I'm saying create a folder inside the CSS tutorial directory, right? And I'm going to call it CSS underscore Flexbox, right? Flexbox underscore game. So this is what we are learning and this is what we are building, right? Game layout. All right, so I do that. Now, can you see that immediately that appeared here? Because that's what I just did. So I want to change directory into that folder. You can just do this and drag this in like this, right? Cd into it. Now I'm inside the project directory, which is what we want to work on, right? I can then do code dot. Code dot is just to open it in the VS Code so that I can continue development from there, right? So you can see that this is opened and currently, okay, I think I opened something else. Okay, I opened a previous one. That's not what I want to open. Let me just close this and open cd into, okay, this is what I want to open, Flexbox layouts, not the other one. So just do that, right? then code dot to open that. So there should be nothing inside because we are yet to create anything. We are just starting. So now we have an empty project folder to start with, right? Let me also zoom this so that we can see clearly. So inside here, we are just going to create our root file, index.html, right? And inside there, we can quickly generate a boilerplate, right? Exclamation mark. I've explained all this before. I won't be going into that. This generates a quick file, a quick template that we can start work with, right? So I will just here, I will say Flexbox, learn Flexbox with, let's just say with game interface, learn Flexbox with game interface. So what we are going to do here is we are going to have so we are going to have the CSS file linked, right? So that we start from there, just basic things that we are supposed to do. So underneath, I'm going to create a main.css file, right? Where we are going to have the CSS, right? And I just want to link it to this file. So you know how to do that already, right? Just say link, then the style is style sheet dot slash main.css. So whatever we are doing inside CSS now, right, can be applied to this HTML, which is what we want. The other thing that I think I'll be doing here is the font family I'll be using, right? So I will just want to pick that quickly. So here we can just say, go to Google Fonts, right? Go to Google Fonts and you have, so you can just search for the way you do it here, right? You can search for Sora, right? And you click on it and select it. I know I've clicked on it already. I already have it here in my cart, right? I'm just telling you to do that. Then you can also look for, let me just check the name, Sora and get embed. If you go to get embed, you see what I'm saying. So I'll be using the at import, right? I'm using outfits too. So you can also search for outfits and select it too. So this one now I have two font family combined together. So when you are copying it, this is what you get, right? And you can just bring it and come into the main.css. I'll be using that import here. Here. All right. So we have that now. That will allow us to use the font family. And quickly, I can just say body. So just that we have that set out. You can say font family. Font family should be, I want to use outfits, right? Outfits. Then fall back to sans serif. So the Sora will be used for some headings, right? Like the logo title. Then we can just say, you don't need to, the other one will be normal. So, but if you do want to, you can just say font style. So you see options there, normal, but it's going to default to normal if you don't set it, right? Font size for our, so we can just say 12 pixels, but let's just leave all that. The major thing is there is the font family that we want to pick, right? I think that's what I want to do there. Then a bit of some resets here, style sheets resets. Okay, don't forget this universal indicator, box sizing, border box. I won't be dwelling on this again because these are some of the things I've explained over and over and over in the previous series that we've had on CSS. So if you don't understand this, just check out my CSS series, right? And you'll be up to speed with this. So box sizing, you want to set to border box, right? Then all padding, right? Want to reset them back to 0 so that any padding that was applied by the browser agent will be removed. Margin should be set to 0, right? So these are just some kind of style sheet reset for us so that we know what we are working with. So that is okay for us at this point, right? Then here, this is also okay for us. Then let's start learning some basic things about Flexbox. Don't forget that this is about basics first, right? Before practice. That gives you understanding and leverage, and that will kind of improve you overall as a developer moving on, as against just building project without proper understanding of the fundamental things that you are supposed to understand, right? So what we are going to do now is already just like the practices, I have my slide prepared. So it's not that long, just 11 items, right? Then we need to just deal with it one after the other. Again, we are talking about Flexbox, right? So what is Flexbox? What is Flexbox? Okay. Before we delve into this, okay, probably I would change the way I work today. So initially, normally I will build the HTML interface first before any other thing, right? But let's just go this route this time around. So what is Flexbox, right? Flexbox is actually a CSS layout module, right? That is designed to create one-dimensional layout. So these are grammars, just so that you understand what I'm saying. Let's put visuals to it. If I come to, let's just say Flexbox W3 school, right? Just so that we have something to look at. All right, so you can see here, we have things going on here. We have a container and then we have items inside that container. So this is how Flexbox is set up. And that definition that says it allows you to arrange items, right, along a direction. So that direction could either be along the horizontal or along the vertical. So in this case, it's along the horizontal, right? So it can be only one direction at a time, not two direction. When we start talking about grid, you will see that grid can allow you to align items in both direction at a time simultaneously, both along the vertical and along the horizontal, right? But with Flexbox, it's just one direction, either along the vertical or along the horizontal. You can see items here are arranged along the horizontal, not vertical, but it can also be along the vertical, and I will show you how to do that. So that is just to quickly explain what this grammar is all about, right? Designed to create one-dimensional layout. So it simplifies the process of aligning, distributing, and controlling the spacing of items. So this is the major use of Flexbox. When you have items, Flexbox items, right? So what Flexbox does is that it allows you to control the behavior of the items that are inside that Flexbox container. So you can move them anyhow. You can space them anyhow. So there are some properties you apply that allows you to align, distribute, and control, right, these items. And that's what makes Flexbox powerful. Just imagine what we are looking at here. You can see that we have equal spacing across all items, right? And there are other things that we can do, wrap this content if they cannot fit into the width of the container again and all that. So we'll look deeply into all this, but understanding this is very, very important, because without it, you will struggle to design good looking interface. So effective for creating responsive and flexible layout. This is very, very important because it makes your life easy. You won't have to write a lot of responsive media queries, right? So if you look at what I have here, it's responsive. If I minimize here, so you can see that if I were to be on tablet, it still looks good. That's because I'm using Flexbox, right? If not, if I are not using Flexbox, you will need to write some media query. You can see this navigation bar is still looking good, right? It's still looking good. If I do this way, this is what we mean by responsive. It adapts to different screen size. You can see that this wraps already. This wraps, that's because I'm using Flexbox. I didn't have to write any special media query. And you can see that this still works. If I were to be on mobile, this looks pretty good. And that's the power of Flexbox, right? You can't play with Flexbox. You have to master it and understand it. And that's why we are doing this, right? So let's see. Okay. Let's move to the second slide. So what are the core concepts when it comes to Flexbox? So the core concepts are basically two. We have the flex container. You have to understand what flex container is. Then the flex items, you have to understand the flex items. So, and everything we'll be learning will be around this. So when you talk about flex containers, after understanding what it is, right, you need to understand the properties that you can use on flex container and the behavior, what that property will cause, what effect that property will cause, right, on the flex items. So most times when you have the proper understanding, you will need to be reading all these things again. right? As you are designing, you know, as you are doing something on the container, you know what will be happening to the items already without having to look at the interface, right? Then the flex item too, there are properties you can apply to the flex item to kind of allow them override whatever the flex container, right, has been set to do, to make them do, right? So we are going to see that. So the flex container is the parent element that houses the flex item. And I think that's straightforward. Again, if I come here, so this is clearer. So this is the flex container. This container with blue background, right? That's the flex container, right? And these are the flex items. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items inside that flex container. So take note of that. Then it is the element where the display property is set. So it is on the flex container that you set the display property. This time around, it will be set to flex. Don't forget, we've talked about display. Again, in the previous section, we talked about the different values that can be set on display. It can be display inline, it can be display inline block, it can be display block, it can be display table, it can be display grid, it can be display. So flex. So at this point now, when we set display, it should be flex, and this usually is placed on the container, right? Then the flex item, the child elements within the container, and usually these are direct children. Take note again, not grandchildren, direct children. That's how Flexbox works. So you must understand that whatever property is set on the container only applies to the direct children. If these flex items now contain items again, and you want to use Flexbox on them, right, you will need to set the display property. So this flex item now will become a container, right, for its children to be controlled, if that makes sense to you, but you will still see it in practice, right? So the child elements within the flex box, that's the flex item. So these items are controlled by the flex container properties, right, which define the alignment, the spacing, and the behavior. And that's what I've mentioned already. Whatever property is set on the container, right, applies to the flex item and dictate how they behave. All right. So we also have, away from that, setting up a flex container and flex box, right? So now that we've understood what Flexbox is all about, and we also understand the core concept when it comes to Flexbox, right? The flex container and the flex items. I also show you the diagram that explains that, right? So we now need to look at setting up a flex container and flex item. How do you set it up? This is where it gets practical now before we build a project around this, right? So I would just like to have some stuff here. So here, let's say I will just comment on here. Let's say here, flex container. So flex container, a container is just a div, right? It can be a section. It's just a box, irrespective of whatever the element name is. It can even be H4, right? That is having some item in it. It can be paragraph having some item in it. It can be section having some item in it, right? Any box, right, having some item in it is a flex box, right? So here now, this is a div, and we can just have a class here, right? And we can just say here, let's just say Flexbox, just like that. So the name is up to you depending on what you are working on, but this is just to explain what we are doing. So Flexbox, I can come into my CSS folder, right, and say down here and say .flexbox. So that box is not a flex box until you do something like display or flex. So the moment you do display of flex, that box automatically becomes a flex box, right? Again, I will remove that style, but let's see something. I want this to be clear enough. So this is the flex box, this container. Now, what are the flex items? Let's say flex items. So let's just have 3 items here for demonstration's sake. So we have item 1. Let me give this a class of let's just say flex item, right? Flex item. So that's the first one, right? This is the second one, and this is the third one. So we have 3 items. These items are direct children of this Flexbox, right? Take note of that. So let's just have some text here. Let's say 1, right? 2 and 3. So if you know this is where understanding is key. Without even applying Flexbox, if I were to ask you what would be the default flow of what we have here, right? For you to be correct, you will need to know the default display behavior of a div, right? A div is actually a block element by default. So that tells you that this will be stacked on each other on the flow. So let me remove this first. Let me remove this star here, right? And let's come here. So once we are here, let's see the default flow here. I expect them to sit on one another and not align on the same horizontal line. So let me open this via a live server so that we can see. All right, so can you see here? I have 1, 2, 3, right? There's no background to them. Maybe that's something that I should also add so that we can separate some of these things and it's clear to us. Let's just say this one is item 1, right? Item 2, then let's say item 3, right? Item 1, item 2, item 3. So let's just style these things so that it makes sense, right? Here, you can just say dot item 1. I want this to have background color of green, right? Then let's just replicate this for 2 and 3. So usually it's good that this is explained this way so that you understand perfectly what is going on. Then 3. So let's say this is red, right? And let's say this one is purple. So then okay, let's just leave it that way. So another thing here is already if I come to the page, I should see that. So can you see now? 1, 2, 3. And you can see that the default behavior of a div is actually blocked, and that's why it's taking the full width, right? So let's also apply something here so that it's big enough. And dot flex item. So don't forget that this dot flex item still applies to all the child elements. So I'm having multiple classes here, and that's the beauty of using classes, right? You can apply multiple class names, right? So I have flex item, item 1, item 2, item 3. So when I want unique styles that separates each of the flex items, I will use item 1, item 2, and 3, right? But when I have a style, when I want a style that applies to all of them, I use flex item. I hope that makes sense, right? If I come in here now, I can say flex item. I just want to apply a width here. I will remove it eventually, but just so that we'll see. Okay, let's even leave it this way. Let's just apply height. Let's say height of 100. I think 100 is too much. Let's say 80 pixel. All right, so this is big enough for us to see now, but this is the normal flow. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And there's nothing like display flex there. But now let's look at what happened when I open this up and then make this container. Don't forget that this container is a box that houses everything. Now let's use display of flex on it, right? So display of flex. So before I go to look at it, I already know what will happen is that the items will now be made to flow along the horizontal. And that is simply because, right, whenever you set a display, whenever you are using Flexbox, right, you have to set the flex direction, right, property. So it defaults to row. If you don't set it, it will default to row, right? But like I told you, you can have column, you can have column reverse, you can have row reverse, you can have row, right? You have just 2 directions, either along the horizontal, then it can be reversed in that horizontal direction. Along the vertical, it can also be reversed, right? So that's why we have column reversed, row reversed. So, but if you don't set it, it defaults to row. And that is why if I come to this screen now, I expect things to align. Can you see now? They are now aligned along the horizontal, not along the vertical. And because the content in it is not much, that's why we have them just taking the required width of the content. So what we can do is on this particular flex item, right, I can set minimum, I can just set minimum width. I will not say none, minimum width of, just say minimum width of 80 pixels so that it can stretch out, right? So you can see now that it does stretch out. So based on this, now we see have something that is, we see have, don't forget there's a container that is housing all of them. Again, let's make it also visible. This flex container, let's apply a background color of this, right? So that we'll see. By the time I come here, so can you see now? This is the container and these are the items. So with the use of Flexbox, I can move these items anyhow, to the right, to the center, to the left. I just need to know what to do, right? To the top, to the bottom, right? Okay, to the container too. Let me also do something, right? Let's also have minimum to the container. Let's have minimum height, right? Of let's say minimum height of 450 pixel, right, for the container. So you can see now there's a lot of space for these items to move about, and that's what we are trying to learn, right? So away from that, now let's move on to other things. But I believe now that you already know how to set up flex container and flex item. I already understand what they do, right? On to the next one. Flex direction and wrap. I said a little about flex direction, right? That is the property that controls what direction, right, the items in the container should flow, either along the horizontal or along the vertical. It cannot be both at the same time. It can only be one, and that's what we are setting it, right? So the flex direction property defines it. Usually, this flex direction also will define the primary axis. So there's what we call the primary axis, and there's what we call the cross axis. So you need to take note of that. So the direction, whatever your flex direction is, that's your primary axis. If your flex direction is set to column, your primary axis becomes the column. If your flex direction is set to row, your primary axis becomes the row, right? I'm emphasizing this because that can be confusing, and it's very, very important. Because when your flex direction is set to column, the behavior of some of the properties will change. For instance, your justify property, right, will no longer be will always be along the primary axis. Then your align items will always be along the horizontal or along the cross axis. So if you do not know how to, if you do not know how to identify your primary axis and your cross axis, you will always be confused about how it works, right? So now know that your primary axis is always the direction of your flex. So if your flex direction is set to row, that's your primary axis, right? The other side now becomes your cross axis. If your flex direction is set to column, that also becomes your primary axis, right? So let's just take note of that. So these are the other options that we have. Row, items are placed in a row. So for instance, now the example we have here is row, and you can see that they are set this way, right? Then we also have, if I decide to change this, don't forget when I said this, I didn't set flex direction. If I set flex direction now to row, nothing will change because that's the default. I've mentioned that. But if I now change this to column, look at what happens. If I change this to column, right? See that now they are now stacked on one another because the direction is now along the column, not along the vertical, not along the horizontal, right? So if I want to reverse things also, you can use column reverse, right? Column reverse will just reverse the direction. Can you see now? Instead of 1, 2, 3, and now have 3, 2, 1. So the column has been reversed. You also have row reverse, right? Can also have row reverse, right? So you can see now that we've reversed the row, right? We're now moving from right to left as against left to right. So that's it. Let's go back to row. And let's move to something else, right? All this we are still going to apply in the mini game project, right? So I want to believe I've done justice to this slide. So let's see what wrap is all about. So there are times that the items, right, will not be able to fit into the container, and you don't want this behavior, overflow behavior, where there is an horizontal line, right? That is automatically set for you because the items can no longer stay within the container, right? So at times you just want the items to move to the next line. That's what wrap is all about. So, but let me try to explain it also with the examples that we have here. So let's assume that I have more of this so that we have many. I'll reverse it eventually, but let's have this, right? So let's say we have many items like this, and by the time we come here, so can you see now? Now, what happens here is that the items here, right? They've grown beyond the width of their container, and because of that, there's this browser default, right? Horizontal overflow effect that comes on board. So you can see that this has overflown the limit of the container, and because of that, we have this overflow effect. So if you don't want that, what we can do is that on the CSS property, right, this Flexbox container, we can set wrap. We can set flex wrap. Flex wrap. So there are different options. You can see no wrap. No wrap is the default, and that's why we have them like that. We can have wrap reverse and we can have wrap. So if I say wrap, you see that, yeah, so that horizontal line is gone and items are now moved to the next line if they can no longer fit conveniently, right, into their container. So that's it with wrap, right? If you do wrap reverse too, it's the same thing. Wrap reverse. So you can see this behavior now. All right, so that's wrap reverse. So we are making progress, right? Just play with these things and get comfortable with them. So by default, flex item try to fit in one line. That's because the default flex wrap property is no wrap, right? So the flex wrap property controls whether they wrap onto multiple lines if the container is too small, right? So no wrap, that's the default. So wrap, items wrap onto multiple lines as needed. Wrap reverse, items wrap onto multiple lines, but in reverse order. Then align flex. So now, after we've talked about some properties on the flex container itself, right? We also have some properties that can be applied on the flex items, right? Very important. Okay, before we even move into that, there are some other properties that can be applied on flex boxes, right? So that we've not mentioned. So we've talked about the display property. We've talked about the flex direction. We've talked about the flex wrap property. So another one now is, let me set this back to no wrap. No wrap. And let's also reverse this back to what we have before, right? Just three items. Great. So now we have just, okay, I want just three. Okay, great. So now we have just that, right? So now let's assume that I want to move these items to the left, to the right, to the center, to the bottom, right? So let's assume I want to move this to the left. So we can set things like this, right? On the flex box, right? You can say, let's deal with the justify first, right? So the justify property. So I can just say justify content property. So if I say justify to let's say justify flex end, right? It's going to move the items to the end. So can you see now the content, which are the item? The content of the container are the items. Move them to the left, right? If you don't want to move them to the left, justify is usually used along your main axis, right? So this is where I want to pay attention. The justify content property is usually applied to the main axis. So if you don't know what your main axis is, then there will be confusion. Now, I will need to explain this. Look at this now. Our main axis here, right, is horizontal. How do I know? The flex direction is row, right? more like horizontal. So that's our direction. And the justify content usually is applied along whatever the flex direction property that is set. So let's say I set this to column. Let's say I set this to column. So automatically now, my flex direction is no longer along the horizontal. My flex direction is along the vertical because I've changed my flex direction to column. My main axis now is now along the vertical. And by the time I'm applying justify content, that will now apply along my main axis. That will be applied along the vertical. So I expect this flex end property now to move the content to the bottom, right? If I come here. So can you see now? It moves it down here, right? And not up here. This is showing this because there's no width to them. Maybe I should also apply minimum width here. Flex item. Okay, minimum width of 8 pixel. Okay, that should still be okay for us, right? That should be okay for us. So we have all these sets now, right? We have all these sets now. So if I want to move this to the center, right, I can just say flex center. All right, so you can see that it moves to the center, equal space from here to here and from here to here. So the movement is along the main axis, along the vertical axis, right? So then if you set this to start, flex start, right? It moves it to the normal, that's the default. It moves it back here, but the movement is along the vertical, right? And that is because my main axis is now along the vertical. I changed it. But if I move it back to row, right, you know that will now be here again, right? If I want it to be at the center, right, I just need to say justify content center, right? That will move the item along the horizontal now. Can you see to the center? If I want end, it will be here. Now, if I want these items to be at the dead center here, right? That's when we'll now need to use this one. Justify content to the center is fine. Then we now have another property which is called align items, right? Align items usually applies to the cross axis. So that your cross axis is opposite the main axis. Once you identify your main axis, the opposite is your cross axis. So for instance, now the main axis here is the row, right? The cross axis will be the vertical. So any property you set on align items, right, will be along the vertical. So what I want now is I want this item to be moved down here. I've moved it to the center along the horizontal using justify. Now I want to move it to the center. So things are at the center now. So I want to move it. I want to move this down along the vertical, right? So I'll be using align items. So you can just set that to center also. So that will ensure that this is at the dead center. So this is powerful. Before now, it's always difficult to center an item within a container. So you use different things, right? Different workarounds before now, but since the advent of Flexbox, right, it's now possible to actually do all these things easily. So justify content center, that is along the horizontal, right? Align item center along the vertical. I know this because this is always used for the main axis, and this is always used for the cross axis. The other one, I will not talk about it, right? Which is justify items, right? Let's just leave that for now. Basically, the most common one you'll be using is the justify content and align items. Okay, let me just stay within aligning Flexbox. Flexbox provides several properties for aligning items within container along the main axis and cross axis. I want to believe that based on what I've been saying so far, you know what main axis and cross axis is all about now, right? Then justify content. I've also explained this already. So we have these possible values: flex start, center, flex end, space between, space around, space evenly. All of them have different behavior, right? So for instance, now if I were to come here and say, justify content, I've done center. So I've done end too. So let's say we want to use space between, right? So you see the behavior. So can you see the behavior of the space between? This is still along the horizontal because that's what we are using. And it's staying at the middle because the align items controls that, right? Here we have equal space between the items. That's space between. We also have space around, right? So this will now be equal space around, not between, now around. And that's why we have space here and space here, because we're talking about space around and not between, right? Then we also have space evenly. So you just need to practice with these things and get comfortable with it. So you can see even space, right, between the items. So those are the properties that we have for justify, right? Then let's also see align items. So which is always used along the cross axis I've explained. Align items, aligns flex items along the cross axis, the vertical by default. But this is not always the case. So your cross axis will always depend on the direction that is set, right, for your flex direction. So if it is row, your cross axis will be vertical. If your main axis is vertical, your cross axis will be horizontal, right? And whatever your cross axis is, that is where this align items property works. So we have stretch, we have center, we have flex start, we have flex end, we have baseline, just like we have for the other one. And I think I've used a couple of that. I've used center, right? It defaults to flex start. You can also use flex end. So you can see the behavior of flex end, right? Then flex start will just take us back to where we have before, right? So you can see flex start. So this thing is powerful. We are just practicing that, but by the time it comes to application to what we are doing, you see that it makes a lot of sense, right? So let's move away from that. Align content. So aligns flex items. Okay, like I've said, I didn't really want to bother you around this align content property, but let's just talk about it. Aligns flex items when there is extra space in the cross axis. So usually this applies to the cross axis, right? And it applies only when we have extra space. So this only works when the flex container have multiple lines also. That is when you have flex wrap in, okay, let me try to bring us into that scenario, right? Let's go back to what we have before. Okay, where we have, plenty divs, but I'll just ensure that we see our space. Items can wrap. So can the items wrap now? Okay, they are not wrapping now, but now for this to work, we need to have the items wrap. So I will set this to wrap, right? I'll set this to wrap. So you can see now, but even though it's wrapped, we still have space, right? We still have enough space. So what we can do now is, if you now say flex, if you now say align contents, right? So if you say center, so can you see that behavior now? But according to the definition, right, it aligns flex lines when there is extra space in the cross axis. So usually your alignment now is along the flex lines, right? The flex have lines. So we have line 1, line 2, line 3. So if you say center, you can see the behavior, right? If you say baseline, so the behavior also will be different. So can you see now, right? So these are just things that you practice. If you say end, flex end, so you can also see that behavior, right? So that's it with the use of align content. But most times, depending on the design, you might not even need to use that. So I think we've come to the end of the basic things that I want us to grab before we start building that project. So we'll be working on the game screen. right? Using Flexbox, like I've shown you. And these are the components that'll be there, right? Title, the instruction panel, input section, result section, and the game controls like the button for submit, restart, and all that, just like we have here. So again, without wasting time, let's get into the building of this, because that is the whole essence of what we have been doing thus far, right? So this might look like it's a long video, but it's very important if you really want to understand how these things works. And you need to give it the time, right? At times you might say you're consuming your data, but if you really want to learn these things, those are some of the sacrifices that that you have to pay, right? All right, let's get on to the project that we want to build, right? We'll start with the HTML first before the other stuff. All right. So I think I will just clean up what we have on Flexbox. These are just for explanation's sake, right? Then here, also remove all this. Okay, so let's also remove this. Okay, so let's just have a div here. Okay, instead of calling it a div, I will use nav. Let's use nav. Right, and here we are going to give it a class name, just a class of nav bar, right? Then let's also have inside there. So usually when you want to set up using Flexbox, right? When you look at your design, you want to set using Flexbox, you also need to align your HTML to fit into that, right? There must be a container and then the children item. For instance, now I want to use Flexbox for this navigation, right? Flexbox for the navigation. So something that comes to mind is that, okay, there is a container. This entire thing is a container. And then we have how many items? One, the logo, this, and the navigation list. So we have two items, two direct children. That's the only reason you can move them apart like this, right? I have this one, the logo, direct child, the first direct child. Then I have another container holding this set of items, right, as a second child. So to the container now, there are two children and not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These ones are going to be grandchildren and they're not going to be affected by the Flexbox property. So working with that flow, right, we are going to have a div here. I'm going to call it, let's say this is S game, right? And this is going to be class of logo. So that's the first item. So the second item too will be like our nav menu, right? Okay, if I want to set up properly, let me call this header, right? Just so that it makes sense to us in terms of the correctness of the HTML header. So the nav, so this is where we now have the navigation items, right? And inside here, we'll just do something brief. Okay, let me just set up properly. Anchor elements, and this is going to be home, right? Don't forget that this does not work like anchor element until you put the href property. This goes nowhere, right? So we have how many items there? We have about 4, the home, the 3, 4. We have the home, we have the about, right? We have the about, we have the services, then we have the contact. All right. So you can see that we have this structured now. The header section, right, consists of the logo, the first child, and the navigation item, the second child. Here we can just give it a class of, can just say menu. So as simple as that. So I want us to style this first before we move to the next thing on the list, right? So that you don't watch me writing this HTML all through. So if we come back to our page, right, chances are that you're not going to see any difference, right? Okay, so you can see what we have now, S game and this is the normal flow, right? Because this is a div and this is another div, right? So, but we want to change that now with Flexbox. Now, if we want to do that, we just need to copy this nav, right? Copy this nav, come to the main.css.nav, right? And then apply that style, right? Let's just say display of flex. So already I told you what that behavior will mean. It will now, the flex direction automatically without specifying it will be along the row. So the items will be laid along the row. So you can see that now, right? So, but this is not the behavior you want because this X game should be on the left. This other navigation list should be on the right. So, but I already told you what to use for that, right? So we also have this. This is going to be, we can use justify. Our flex direction, our main axis is along the row, right? So justify content is what we use to move items along the row. And I want to separate them. So I will use space between, right? The items should be space between. So you can see now that I have SGame here. I have home about services on the other end, right? Then okay, let's apply background color to this so that you see that things are not properly centered yet along the vertical. So let's say background color is set to hash 292941, right? Let me also set padding. Don't forget padding is space between the border and the content. Let's set padding of 15 pixels. This, we apply padding to all the sides, right? And let's set the color to white. That's hash FFF. Great. So let's check what we have now. So can you see what we have now? Right? Can you see what we have now? So I've not applied anything along the horizontal and it's looking good, right? But if I were to set height here, right? If I were to say height of, let's say height of 85 pixel, right? And come back here, it will not be centered along the vertical. Can you see now? It is not centered. Things are working along the horizontal, like you want them spaced apart, but along the vertical, it's not centered. So I want it at the perfect center along the vertical. And that is where you now ask yourself, what property can you use, right, to center things along the vertical? So now that I know that my main axis is along the row, my cross axis is along the vertical. And what to use for that is items, align items. Align items, I'll just say center, right? That will ensure that things are perfectly centered. Can you see now? Let's get along the vertical, perfectly centered, along the horizontal, spaced apart. So that's what we want for that. Don't mind this yet. I will start this to actually be white. What we have there is just a default browser style for links. So again, for the body section, let me have height here. Height of 100 VH, right? Let me also have background color of hash 1E, 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 right? Okay, I've not set the text color before now. Text color of hash FFF2, right? I've set the font family already to outfit, right? Which is correct. All right, great. So you can see now that things are shaping out, right? Now let's move to, okay, the logo. Let me start the logo first. You can see that from what we have on the design, the logo is actually meant to be this big, right? and it's using a different font from what we are using, right? We are using outfit for the general text, but for here, I'm using Sora, right? Let's also correct that. So here I can just say dot logo. That is the class name I placed on the logo. Dot logo, I can say font family, right? Font family should use Sora, right? And it should fall back to sans serif if Sora is not available. Then font size should be 2.5 Remini, right? Remunit is usually taking its reference from the root, right? The body, whatever the font size of the body is, Remunit is taking its reference from the root, right? Then we have font weights of, let's just say 600. Right, so if I come back here, so you can see that we have that shaped. Now, let's also make this have the proper color, right? So I can just come down here and say dot, I think, what did I call it? Dot navbar, then links. So links, this is a descendant selector. If you remember, again, if you don't know what descendant selector is, check my series and check my YouTube series, right? On CSS, you will see things on all these things that I'm talking about. So navbar space anchor element. So this is a descendant selector, and I'm saying all anchor elements that are inside the navbar. They might not necessarily be direct children, right? But as long as they're inside the navbar container, the style should apply to them. I want text decoration set to none, right? Text decoration set to none so that it will not be underlined. And I want the color, right? I want the color set to #FFF, right? Which is white, right? So you can see that, right? So maybe I should also ship in something here. Okay, maybe in subsequent videos I will show you that. So it's always good to not encode color codes here, right? Probably it's always good to set them under root as a variable, and they'll be using them. So that way you can change it in one place and to apply everywhere. But let's get on with this, right? So if I come back here, that is good. Now, the item should be spaced out, right? Can just have margin to the right. So in fact, inside this second part, it depends on how you want to do it. No, I have a div here. So I can even treat this as another, and I will do it like that, as another flex item. So I will use display of flex on this nav again, and these items becomes the children, right? So here, I can just come down here and say dot menu, right? Okay, let's even use descendant so that we know that it's menu that is inside navbar, right? So we want to use display of flex again. So this is the second time now, display of flex. Then we want it's going to be row by default, which is what we want. Then we want items aligned to the center. So we can just say align items to the center so that they are perfectly centered, right? So you can see that behavior. Then here we can use another property called gap to space the item, right? We can say gap of, we can just say gap of 20 pixel. Let me see. Right. Gap of 20 pixel. So you can see that they are spaced out now, but we use Flexbox. I use Flexbox on this container. Again, for this nav section, which is a container with nav list, I also use Flexbox, right? So you have two ways. You have seen two ways of using Flexbox now. And this is what you use in actual applications, right? Because the almost all applications have navigation, right? And this will be perfect and really professional. What else? Text decoration. So this still applies, right? Text decoration of none and all that. So let's move to the next thing. I think I'm okay with what we have here. So if you want to change the overstate, you can always do that, right? But I don't think that should be our focus here. So can just say on over, when you hover on the navigation, right, let's change the color to, let's change color on over. So let's just change color to, let me just use something like this, right? So when you come here, so you can see that that is changing. So what you can do there is up to you. So let's move to the next side of things, which is this section. Let's say the analytics section. So let's quickly build the UI for that before styling. Here, this, let me just label this. It's always good also that you label your HTML properly, right, with appropriate comments. So let's just say header. Then here, let's say analytics, right? So down here, we are also going to use flex. Don't forget, flex is all we are doing. I have how many items here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So here I can just say, let's replace this with section, right? Let's say this is analytics section. And inside there, I have these different divs. The first div, right? The first div, the second div, third div, fourth div, fifth div. So you see that this is already positioned to take care of to use Flexbox. The flex, this is the flex container, right? The section box, and these are the flex items, five of them. So what we can do here is, let's just call this card container, right? Let me say card container, right? Then of course each of the stores we have name, so I'll just call them card, right? So we are going to apply just one star to all of the flex items so that we style it once and it applies to all of them, right? Again, these are some of the things that I've already explained in the previous series that we've had, right, together. So for the first card, what I have there is I want a paragraph, right, that holds the 80, right, the analytic value. Then I also want I want a span, right? I want a span, okay, a span that holds the analytic value, then the paragraph that holds the analytic type. So let's say users 80. Then we come down here, it's going to be the same thing, right? Just to make our life easy. Here, this is going to be stars, right? And this is going to be let's say 20, right? Then this is going to be points, right? Points. And this is going to be 100, right? Usually this will be something dynamic as the user plays the game, right? So, but we are only concerned about design here, levels, right? So let's say 100. Then let's say this one, medals, right? So let's say medal 3. So we have this now. If you come back to the UI, it's not going to look like it. So, right, CSS is what we now make it look like it. We are going to be using Flexbox, so we want things to align along the horizontal, like you see here, not along the vertical. But this is the default flow of divs, and that's why we have them along the vertical. So what we need to just do is come to the Flexbox container and use Flexbox to align things. So it's all about Flexbox today. So let's say analytic, right, section dot card container. So for the card container, we just have how do I want to handle that now? Okay, let's just have display, of flex. So again, I will show you the behavior. You should already know why. So you see now that things are laid along the horizontal, right? Then let's have for the card container, let's have flex wrap of wrap. So don't forget I've explained what flex wrap is all about. This is so that we don't need to write extra media query. If the items can no longer fit conveniently into the container, let them move to the next line, right? Then gap. So you've seen me use gap for the menu part. So it's just the spacing between the spacing outside the box flexbox items. So here I want to apply 20, right? And I want padding so that there is space between the contents, padding of 20 pixel or so. So all this, if you check, you will still not see, okay, yeah, so you can see that there's a padding, right, based on what I've applied, but we've not gotten to this point. We need background border radius and all that to make it look like that. So that's it with the flex container. Then the flex item itself, which is the card. So again, if you check here, you see that I have the flex container here, right? Which is the Flexbox container, then the card items. So I just want to target one. Once I start one, it will apply to all the rest because they share the same class name. So here I want background first, background color set to ash. 5E 5E D1. So I want padding set to 20 pixel, right? Padding set to 20 pixel. So now if you check again, so you can see, but there's no border radius, right? So here we can apply border radius of 8 pixel so that we have that beautiful curved edges, right? Then we want color set to hash FFF. If you don't set it, it's going to inherit it from the parent body because that's what we set as default, right? Then we want the width set to 150, right? 150 pixels so that each item is actually of a fixed weight, right? 150 pixel. We want the height also set to 100 pixel, right? Then we want text to be aligned to the center. So it will not be perfectly centered. So we are going to do it a different way. So you can see that even though it's aligned to the center, it's not perfect. The distance along the vertical from here to here is different from here. So to perfectly center it, I've shown you before now, right? We just use Flexbox for that. So here, if you want to perfectly center those items, right? Look at it here again. The card is having two items, this and this. I can make this become a flex container. And because of that, arrange these two items the way I want them to be. So that is what I want to do here. So I will say display of flex again on this particular card. So to center along the horizontal, I will say justify because that is my main axis, right? Justify center, right? Then along the vertical, we say align items to the center. So once you've done that, you can see that this is perfectly centered. Now, there's something I need to correct here. This should have a flex direction of column because we want things stacked, right? Column. All right, so you can see now that this is beautiful. And that is exactly what we have there. See that we didn't have to do much. And again, this is responsive, right? Because of the decision to use Flexbox, right? This is responsive. If you do it this way, you can see that it still save it and it's just move to the next line. So that's it with that section. I think the next section we want to work on now is the game section, right? The game section. So let's move back to the HTML page. So if you have stayed this long, you have tried game section. So let's say section, right? And we're just going to give it So we are going to give it a class of game. Let's say game container. All right. So inside the game container, we have different sections, right? We have the title, or you say header, title or header, right? So the title header is going to have header. Don't forget we have one header before, so I don't want to use header here. I'll just use div, right? So that, of course, there's a way you can do it that will not be an issue. But right now, I just want to go this way. Class name of game header, right? And in that game header section, we have heading 1, right? And it's going to be guess the number, right? That is all, right? So if you come here, can you see now guess the number? Then we move away from that and we go to the next section, which is the instruction panel. So instruction panel. So that is this, right? I'm also show you that. Can you see now? This is the instruction panel. So we just come right into that and say, let's just call it section also. Section with a class of game instruction, right? Those classes will allow us to style. That's why we just have to apply game instructions. All right, so here we are going to have a paragraph that just says guess a game, something like this, right? Let me just copy this. All right, so we have another paragraph in between that says press to submit. So this is also using Flexbox, and that's why it's correctly placed, right? Then that's it about the instruction panel section, right? So then we move to the input section. So if you don't know how to work with form fields, right? This is just another example. So here we are going to have section again. And I'm going to give it a class name, and it's going to be game inputs. All right. So we are going to have inputs with a type of number, right? We have ID of, so usually this ID will be useful if we are doing the if you are using the JavaScript, but I will spare you of the JavaScript, right? Because we've not really done JavaScript. So placeholder, let's just say enter your guess. All right. So of course, in that section, we have a button. We have a button. I just say submit. Right. And of course, we have an ID here that is going to be used along with JavaScript. Submit guess. So that's it with that section, right? So we have two more sections. We have the results section and the control section. So here we have the let's say we have the results screen, right? And that's also going to be a section. So the class name of this section is going to be game results, right? Game results. And just going to have a paragraph that says make a guess to start the game. Make a guess to start the game, right? Let's leave the ID part. This should have an ID of, let's say, results message. All right, so that's it for that section. Then the last section is the game control. So that's also going to be a section, and we just give it a class of game controls. All right. All right, so game controls. So for game controls, we have button. We have a button that says restart. Right, restart game. And usually that we have an ID to control that. ID of restart game. So that is coming from this section again. So you can see that here, right? You can see we are done with this section. Now we are done with this section. We are doing a restart game and this other one. So all these use Flexbox, and that's the beauty of this. It allows you to practice Flexbox like really. So the second item, right, is going to be the div, right? It's going to be a div with a class of score, a div with a class of score, right? And inside that div, you are going to have paragraph, right? And we're going to have attempts. So you know how this works, right? I just want to use the span to target this text differently. So it starts with 0, attempt 0. Then this is going to have ID of attempts count, right? So basically that is what we want to capture here, and I think we already have that set. So you can see now this is a game interface. It doesn't look like it because we've not applied CSS. So now let's quickly apply the CSS, and that will be the end of this particular tutorial section, right? Then let's say game section, right? The game container is where we are starting from, right? So dot game dash container, and that is this container, right? Remember, the game section is in the container that allows to work with it like a Flexbox game container. So for that game container, we want the width set to 300 pixel, because you'll notice that this is no more than 300 pixel from here, right? And we have curved edges, it has background and all that. So these are the things I'm trying to actually do now. So width of 300 pixel. So margin, that's space outside the container now, or 20 pixel, right? That will just ensure that things are perfectly aligned, right? There. Then we have aside margin, we have let's apply padding, right, of 20 pixel also. Then the background color of ash 2941. I think I've applied that at some point. Then the border radius, so that we have that nice curved edge, border radius of 10 pixel. All right, so you can see that things are shaping out, right? Border radius of 10 pixel. Again, I'm going to make this code available on my GitHub, right? So if you do need to reference it, you can also do that. Then box shadow. So let's apply box shadow property. Box shadow of 0 pixel along the horizontal, 0 pixel along the vertical, 50 pixel, 15 pixel in terms of blur, right? RGBA, red, green, blue, color code with the transparency. So 0, 0, 0. This is going to be black with 0.5 in terms of transparency, right? So that's what we are going to have there. Then we have this is going to be display flex. Again, that's why we are doing this, right? It's going to be display flex. The flex direction is going to be column, right? So that items, okay, if I don't apply that, you know it's row by default, and this is not what you want, right? This is not what we want. So that's why I'm saying flex direction should be change to column. Flex direction, change to column, right? Align items to the center. Now that flex direction is changed to column, right? When you use align items, it's going to be along the horizontal because if you want things to be aligned along the column, which is your main axis, you will use justify. But if you are using align items, it's going to be along the cross axis, right? Which is the horizontal in this case. I just want to say center, right? Then we want to apply gap. So gap of 20 pixel. That's just space for the space between all the flex items, right? So when you come down here, so you can see that things are perfectly centered now and all that. So let's now target individual items, right? For instance, the heading one, right? I just come down and say dots. I think the HTML name, okay, game class name is game header. So just say dot game header heading one. So this is selecting heading one inside game header. Font size, we want to set that to 0.9 EM, right? So this is relative to the parent container and not the root, font size, right? It's relative when you use EM, it's relative to the font size of a parent container. But when you use remonit, it's relative to the root, which is the body, right? Text align to the center, right? So if you check that, you can see that we have guess a game and all that. Then let's move to the next one, which is the input section. Okay, I think this one is having that color. Guess the game. Okay, I think I'm supposed to have, okay, I think I missed that. This is supposed to have a different color. So let's change this to, supposed to be bigger, 1.5 rem, 0.5 em, test and line center, then the color should be hash FFCC00, right? So yeah, then the input section, right? Let's say this is header, and let's say this is instruction. For the instruction section, we have dot game instructions, dot game instructions, and we just want font size to be set to 0.9 rem, right? And we want text to be aligned to the center, right? So when you come here, so you can see that we have that guess portion. Then let's now come down to the other one, which is input section dot game dash input. So this is going to be display of flex, and this is going to have let's say gap of 10 pixel, and this is going to have width of 100% so that it fools the container. So you can see what we have there, right? That's for this. So that's just for the game. So we are using for the game too, we are using flex, right? And you can see that it has a container. the what is it? Yeah, so game input, right? So this is a container. It has two items, and that's what we've applied flex to. So let's now start the actual game input containers, game inputs fields. So let's say game inputs dash input. So there's an input field inside that container. I want to style it. So we want to give it a flex of 1. So this is one thing that I didn't talk about during the explanations, right? So you can also set flex values. So there's flex grow, there's flex shrink, and there's flex basis, right? So this flex of 1 now is just a way of saying, it's a short way of saying flex. If I don't want to use this shortcut, I will need to say flex grow of 1, right? Flex shrink of 0, right? And flex basis. So in order to do that, usually you just use the shortcut and just say short syntax, just say flex of 1. So this will mean that the input field, right, should take all the remaining space to itself. Don't forget that they already have, before this input fields already have a default space captured. So, but there are times that we have extra spaces, right? And you want the items, right, in that container to still fill in into the extra spaces. So you use the flex grow property, right, to actually make the items grow, right, into those spaces. But you can now set by what value should they grow from the remaining space. What value should be assigned to each of the flex items. So that's what I'm trying to say here. I'm saying here that the input field, which is one of the flex items, should take all the remaining space. So I'm saying all because by the time you get to the other element, which is the button element, I'm not setting anything on it. And if I don't set anything on it, it just means that it's going to take the only amount of space that its content allows it to take, right? If that makes sense. But you can see from here now that this is already taking full space. There's a gap between them, and this is just taking what it needs to take, right? It submits. Flex of 1. Then let's have padding of 8 pixel, right? Let's have border of none, so that there's no border of none. Then let's have curved edges, border radius of 5 pixel. So again, when you check, can you see that behavior now, right? Then the next thing now is the button, right? The button is not yet start. So let's say dot game inputs button. So that button should have a padding. So padding to the left and padding to the top and bottom of 8 pixel, then to the left and right of 12 pixel, right? So if you check, can you see that behavior? The submit button becomes bigger, right? Then we want background color to also be set. Background color of ash 3A, 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 3AAD, right? Then we want the color to be white. If you don't set this, it's actually going to also pick from inherit from the body, right? Then we want border of none, right? Then we want border radius so that there will be curved edges. Border radius of 5 pixel. Then cursor or pointer. So since it's a button, so we want that and to be there. So can you see now? So that's just it, right? So let's move to the next side of things. So when you hover on this button, let's change the background color, right? Let's say here is what we are targeting. We want to add a pseudo selector to it, which is over, right? And we want to say when you hover the background color, see, there's no space here. Background color should be set to hash 4E 4E BC. So when you come back here and hover on the button, so you can see that light that allows you to know that you've hovered on something, right? So what we are learning here is even, I'm taking my time to explain all the CSS properties. So it's more than just the Flexbox things, right? So you can pick up extra properties that you are not used to already. So the next thing for us to start is the results section. So for the results section, we have .game results, right? Again, if you check here, you see that game results. We have just one paragraph there, right? So here we can just say the game results should have width of 100 pixels, so that this is just to echo out the results, right? 100%. So 100% is going to be full width of its container. It's just going to make the screen take the full width of its container, right? 100%. Text should be aligned to the center, right? So that as the input result is coming in, it stays at the center. The padding around this box should be 10 pixels to every side, top, bottom, right, left, right? Then background color should be set to ash 34 ash 3450. All right, border radius should be set to 4 pixels, or let's say 5 pixels, right? And the color should be set to ash FF6B 6B. All right, so that's just, can you see now, make a guess to start this game. So this is the results box that I've just started. You can see this faint background with the curved edge and all that, right? So I think we're on the last stage now, which is the game controls, right? So let's just have that start. Game control. So for the game control dot game, right, dash controls. So just want to be sure that that's also game controls, right? Yeah, correct. So here we want to use display of flex. So if you notice the setup here, you see that we have game controls and we have two direct children, 1, 2, right? We want to use Flexbox to make them sit next to one another, just like we have here, right? Just like we have here. You can see that the restart game and this, they are sitting next to one another. So what we use here is these two items are flex items of a container, right? And the container properties just makes them position this way. So that's why I'm using flex. That's why I'm using flex here, display of flex here. Then we want justify content to be space between, right? So they will be spread apart. So you can see, okay, restart game attempt. So I think something is missing. Justify content space between. Let me check this game control. Display of less, justify content space between. Okay, I'm not expecting them to sit this way. Okay. Let me stretch also the width of the item, width of 100%. So at times, if there is not enough space for them to spread into, you won't see the effect. So you can see that it's spaced out. Now, initially, the space was not 100%, like the container was not full width. So there was no space for this to stretch into. But now the moment I said the width should be 100%, so it's going to stretch into this parent container suite, right? And that's why we have that spacing. Then align items, we just say center. All right, so you can see that this is perfectly laid, right? So some other things are maybe just the button for us to style this button, this one, to properly style this way, right? Uh, Properly styled this way, right? So my voice is getting dried already because this has been a long video. Dot game controls button, right? Just set the background color to ash 5E 5ED1, right? The color should be set to ash F4, which is off white, right? Padding should be set to 8 pixel top and bottom, 15 pixel right and left, right? Border should be set to none. Then we want border radius set to 5 pixel. Then we want cursor pointer. All right. So if you notice that, so you can see here now, right? And that over effect is also there. So now let's just target this guy and change the over behavior. On over, right? We want the background color change to 7A dB, 7A dB. All right. I think then the other one that you might not see now, since there is no score, but once the score comes in, right, you want font size set to 0.9 em, right, and color set to hash CCCC, CCC, right? So yeah, that's what we have here. That's what we have here, right? So you can see that we've not just learned about Flexbox, we've also mastered how to apply it. And you can see that this is very, very clean, right? Now that we are done with this, I think that brings us to the end of what we want to look at today, right? But before I wrap this up, let's just do some stuff. If you don't know about Git and using Git to manage your project, you can also check on my GitHub series, right? So let me just show you how to walk through committing the updates that I've worked on thus far. So you can see that there is this telling me that I did have some changes, right? So I can just say git add. I want to add everything, right? If I do git status again, it's just going to show me all I've worked on today, right? What I've added. So I can now say git commit -m, right? I can just say flex, let's say flex box layout with guess game, right? So that's what we looked at. So that has been committed. If you do git status again, there is nothing to commit. Now, the next thing is to push my updates. I'll just let me see into the root project, right? And I'll just say git status again, right? I can say git push. If you do git branch, so that you know what you want to push, I mean the main branch, right? So I can just say git push origin main. So this should push my updates to my GitHub repo, right? Yeah. So if I come to my GitHub repo, I should be able to I should be able to see that. All right, for that particular project, let me see. Okay, there is it, right? So when we come here, we are going to be able to see. So can you see Flexbox game layout 1 minute ago, right? So this is how we manage our project, and learning this is also very important, right? So that brings us to the end of this particular series. See you in the next section. Thank you.